Alright, everybody. So, this is like where it gets good. This is where it gets super excited. As you can tell, I'm super excited. Spanish American War. Why? Cuban. Super Cuban. Loving the Cubanness. And we get to talk about how Cuba is the way it is. And this is extremely important, guys. I know this is 1895 and forward, but this is going to tell us why it is that Cuban American relationships are the way they are today. It starts in 1895. It starts with American imperialism. It starts with the Platt Amendment. It starts with a series of abuses because, America. So, we're explaining the causes of the Spanish American War. We're defining some major battles. And then we're going to talk about consequences of war, including imperialism. First person you got to know, Jose Marti. He was a poet. Poet, not a fighter. Kind of why he dies really, really early on into the fight. He goes charging into battle. And guns kind of tend to kill people that charge into battle. But hey, you know what? He inspired a people to keep fighting, and there's nothing better to rally a people than a martyr. You have William Randolph Hearst. He was the owner of the New York Journal, and he is the person who's going to start yellow press, yellow journalism. We kind of talked about that, and that's the next term. That's newspapers that use sensational headlines and exaggerations to promote readership. This is kind of like the tabloids. When you're going to the grocery store, that's like, Oprah Winfrey has 16 babies. And you're like, wow, I didn't know that people could do that. And it turns out that she just adopted some kids or, met 16 children somewhere. But it got your attention and it made you pick up the magazine. You have jingoism. That's aggressive nationalism. That's when we're like, America, yeah. We have George Dewey. He's the Commodore of the U.S. Squadron that destroyed Spanish fleet in Manila Bay. And I told some of you today, it was kind of a sad showing for the Spanish. The Americans destroyed the entire Spanish fleet before the Spanish get to even fire a shot. I'm just saying, kind of sad. You have Emilio Aguinaldo. He's going to be the leader of the Filipino nationalists who defeat the Spanish army with the help of the Americans, although they do a lot of the fighting by themselves. And it's going to be Emilio Aguinaldo who's going to fight the Americans once the Americans show that they want the Philippines for their own. You have the Rough Riders, the original Rough Riders, not the really weird Rough Riders from the 1990s. That's my generation. They're a volunteer cavalry unit, and they're going to be led by Teddy Roosevelt. Why? Dude, why not? And you're going to get the Treaty of Paris, and that ends the Spanish-American War. And that includes U.S. acquisition of Puerto Rico and the purchase of the Philippines. The Spain was like, oh, hey, we won out. We made $20 million out of this. And why do we need the Philippines? Because it's an important port city. It's an important port island, where we can reload our ships, where we can put more coal into them, where we can get them some gasoline eventually as we get to that part of history. They're extremely important for America to expand into the Pacific. So causes and effects, you have American economic interests, you have national imperialist spirit, and you have yellow press brought on that gets us to the brink of war, and then America finishes the job. In 1897, you see Spain is in decline as an imperialist power. All it really has left is the Philippines, Puerto Rico, and Cuba, and they're going to lose those. You have Jose Marti in 1895, after a failed initial rebellion early on, launch a second war for independence from Spain. You have Valeriano Wheeler, and he was brutal. And when I say brutal, I mean concentration camps, destroying rural farms so that the local populations can't eat, so they starve. So you start getting Americans, because it's only 90 miles from America, coming over to Cuba and really looking at the amount of just destruction that Spain is wreaking on these Cuban people. So you're going to have Pulitzer and Hearst start inflaming American emotions. They put the most egregious photographs that they can find on the covers of their newspapers. They're like, how could people do this? This is everyday life, when it was just the worst possible example over and over and over and over again. McKinley is going to warn Spain to make peace and to make sure that Spain knows that we mean business. McKinley is going to send the battleship Maine. In addition to showing Spain that we mean business, they're sending it over to protect American citizens and American interests. Well, the Spain blows up, my birthday, 1898, and 266 Americans are killed. Now, officially, at first, a Naval Board of Inquiry is going to blame them on a mine. But Americans here at the time, thanks to yellow journalism and jingoism, are going to blame the Spanish. They're going to say, no, 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 the Spanish did it. Now, in retrospect, because historians will look at documents and try and find the truth in history, it was very likely Cuban nationalists who caused the destruction to bring Americans to help them in the war, which is absolutely genius because they knew that Americans would never blame the Cubans for doing it. So it was kind of like a Boston Tea bombing party. Too soon? Maybe. So, in response, because Spain doesn't want America at war with them, Spain's going to be like, all right, no more concentration camps. We're going to be nice. We won't burn anything down. But still, President McKinley's like, nah, we really got to get in on this. So after a long debate, Congress agrees to go to war with Spain because it takes an act of Congress to go to war. You have some critics that are saying, America, you really just want Cuba as an imperial territory. And so you have the Teller Amendment. The Teller Amendment says that the United States, under no circumstances, can annex Cuba, which means take them as their own colony. Now, remember, this last video I made you watch said that you do not have to specifically own an island. You don't have to be on it. You don't have to own that territory to really be an imperial power. And so we'll see what America's going to do is they're going to give Cuba its independence following the Teller Amendment, but they're going to add the Platt Amendment to the Cuban Constitution, which has certain specifications for the Cuban people, and we'll see that in a second. The U.S. Navy goes and blockades Cuban ports, and President McKinley calls for 100,000 volunteers. Spain declares war on the United States, and the war begins with U.S. victories in the Philippines. Again, it was a really sad defeat for the Spanish Navy at Manila Bay. And then you have Filipino independence fighters who saw this as a way for them to fight for their own country and their own independence. And Spanish troops are eventually going to surrender in the Philippines. The U.S. troops are going to easily defeat the Spanish in Cuba. Honestly speaking, by the time America entered the war, Cuba had kind of already won. Guantanamo Bay is captured. You have Teddy Roosevelt's Rough Riders on San Juan Hill. And you have the rest of the Spanish fleet destroyed at Santiago. You can have Spanish troops surrender in Cuba and on the island of Puerto Rico. And so these two countries, Cuba and Puerto Rico, honestly believe that they're getting their own independence. Emilio Aguinaldo and the Filipinos really believed that they had won their own independence and that America had only really destroyed the Navy ships at the port. The Treaty of Paris is going to give us Cuba and Puerto Rico and Guam. So we get those three islands. You got to know this. Cuba, Puerto Rico, and Guam. And we're going to buy the Philippines for $20 million. We ratify that treaty. And off this victory, President McKinley is going to choose Teddy Roosevelt as his vice president because he got all this publicity. And you see McKinley and Roosevelt easily win the election. Super, super, super important. So we're going to keep going on this information, guys. I'm going to keep talking more and more about the imperialistic powers, and hopefully you've seen this video before our activity on October the 16th. You guys have a wonderful night.